What is the best natural supplement for muscle growth? Now, a lot of you may be thinking like, well, there's got to be something like creatine, or I can use protein powders or branched chain amino acids, but actually what I'm going to talk to you about is something that naturally occurs in your body that activates muscle building, and these are called peptides. And for those of you who don't know what peptides are, they're short chains of amino acids, and they turn on all the cell signaling in your body, and they allow us to actually perform at our best, build muscle really healthy, and they can really help you find your unique edge when it comes to your muscle growth. So in this video, what I'm going to do is show you why I think peptides are the most natural and safest supplement for muscle growth. And I'm also going to show you the mechanism of action so that you may want to lean into it yourself and give it a try. So let's jump in. Okay, so if you're thinking about peptides, and maybe you've tried some, or maybe you've heard some of my other podcasts on these or YouTube videos, or maybe you've read my book, The Peptide Blueprint, and you're curious about them, but you haven't jumped in yet, or maybe you've never heard of peptides before. Well, stick around because I believe peptides are going to be at the forefront of medicine in just a few years. I mean, with all we have coming out with AI, we're just finding these peptides, once sequenced, we're learning that they are so darn effective. So there's 4 categories that we're going to talk about with peptides and muscle growth. And if you are a real nerd and you love learning, then grab a pen and paper and let's dig in. So the first branch of peptides are called myostatin inhibitors. Now, if you think of what a myostatin inhibitor is, so to inhibit something is to pull it back, turn it off, and to turn things on, that's what's called an agonist. And so if you have agonists in the body, then you're going to have this braking system that gets put into place, and then you have this dual mechanism called a feedback loop because it's a biological system. Our body has thousands, if not millions, of biological systems at any given time. Right now I'm awake, so my melatonin production is going to be lower than it will at night when I'm asleep, if that makes sense. So same thing with peptides, and when you're going to build muscle, you've got to realize that our body does not want to put on any more muscle than it absolutely has to. Why is that? Well, muscle is very metabolically demanding. And by demanding, I mean you've got to have good blood flow, you've got to have nutrients to support that muscle. So metabolically, it's a very energy-intensive system. But the downside of having no muscle is everything in your body starts to break down. So just because our biology doesn't want us to have too much muscle, that doesn't mean that we should just give in and say, all right, let's just all be wimpy. But actually the best thing about this is if you can think of myostatin inhibition, so you turn off myostatin, you put on the brakes on one system. Remember that feedback loop is coming up, and that's called follistatin. And follistatin is powerful because actually in some of the studies, and I remember learning about this when I was studying at the University of Utah and then Hawaii, is the professor showed these images of animals who had myostatin turned off. So they used a drug to turn off the myostatin expression, and these cattle just became these monsters. And it's a little bit alarming. And so peptides do not turn off myostatin entirely. They just inhibit it for a short period of time so you can get an expression of more follistatin, which is one of the pathways that you want when it comes to building muscle. And so the reason why these are natural, because these are literally the natural mechanisms that our body goes through when it comes to muscle building. And this is one of the pathways. So myostatin inhibitor that I love is called ACE-031. I have videos on this, a lot of content. It's a peptide that was studied with postmenopausal women, and they looked at these women and they did a visceral analysis. So they saw how much fat do they have around their organs. They measured the fat on the thighs relative to the muscle, and then on the entire body. And they put these women on ACE-031 for 30 days. And these were weekly injections, and they were doing 1 milligram of ACE-031, so a tiny little amount, just to turn off that myostatin so they could express greater levels of follistatin. And they had a control group, and compared to the control group, what happened with these women is they were able to gain lean muscle mass up to 5% in their legs. They lost 9% of the overall fat in their legs. So that's in 30 days. That's phenomenal. They also found that generally over their whole body, they're able to lose 4% of visceral fat and adipose. So it led them to conclude that, okay, maybe in postmenopausal women, follistatin gets turned off. But actually, women express more follistatin than men do generally, so men also respond really well to this. In fact, the first thing that ACE-031 was studied for is young boys who had muscular dystrophy, so Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and so their muscles started to atrophy at a very young age. And they found by using ACE-31, they were able to regain their gait speed, so they actually walked faster, they were able to regain some muscle control, and it was a very effective treatment. So now you can use this naturally to turn off follistatin. The second peptide that naturally occurs in your body is a peptide called Mots-C, or Mots-C. And Mots-C is a mitochondrial encoded peptide, and it acts right on the cytochromes, and it allows your DNA to express greater levels of metabolic energy. And so Mots-C, interestingly enough, is also a myostatin inhibitor. So it's made by the skeletal muscles is where you're going to see the highest levels of this Mots-C peptide. And when it's expressed, it happens after we exercise. So in one study, they took participants and they tested their Mots-C expression before they exercised, and then they put them on a stationary bike for 20 minutes, and then they measured the levels of circulating Mots-C after the exercise, and they found that their Mots-C levels increased by 400 to 500%, and that persisted for up to 6 hours after exercise. So it led researchers to look into the idea that maybe Mots-C is like exercise in a bottle. And of all the peptides, it's one of the closest to exercise in a bottle. But there's nothing that I found that can, even being on Mots-C and using it for over a decade, off and on, I found that you still need to exercise. So sorry, for those of you who are like, yes, we found, oh, okay. No, we didn't. And I don't know that we ever will find anything that matches the benefits of exercise. But what I do know is that when you exercise, when you lift weights, when you want your body to build muscle, if you can turn off the braking system that prevents your body from growing muscle and activate follistatin, there's a really good chance that you're going to have healthier muscle tissue, and you're going to circumvent a lot of the things that happen with aging, like sarcopenia, or our muscle mass starts to decrease and our adipose or our fat tissue starts to increase. Okay, so that's one pathway. The second natural pathway that you can work on with peptides is your growth hormone pathway. Now, growth hormone, it works on these two interesting systems. One is called mTOR, and that's the mammalian target of rapamycin. But mTOR, when it's turned on and expressed, what that means is that your body's in more of a growth or an anabolic cycle. Catabolic is when our bodies are in a decline, when you're starting to lose muscle mass. So when we run your labs, and for those of you who want to go deeper to see if some of these muscle building natural therapies, natural meaning this is what your body makes, and we try to mimic exactly what your body's doing. We don't try to bring in a bunch of raw material and just hope that it works, but we can get very targeted in muscle growth. Then you go to agelessfuture.com, get a free assessment with one of my health span experts, and they'll help you get your blood labs ran. But some of the markers we look at to see, okay, do we need to work on mTOR? Do we need to work on myostatin or follistatin? We'll look at markers like your creatinine levels. We'll look at your overall kidney function. We'll look at the blood urea nitrogen. These are really important because higher levels of nitrogen means you're going to hold on to more hydration in your muscles and create more ATP, which is energy in the muscles. So mTOR is a really important component. The other side, so the brake to mTOR, is AMPK. And so one of the things that we do to activate mTOR is use these growth hormone releasing peptides. And the growth hormone releasing peptides, one of the things that turns off growth hormone is when you have excess levels of insulin. So when we run your blood, we're going to look at your hemoglobin A1C, your fasting glucose levels. We'll also look at your fasting insulin levels and C-peptide. And that can show us if your fasting insulin levels are elevated or if they're outside of optimal range, then there's a good chance that you're not getting the right expression of growth hormone. And so the AMPK pathway is where we can use substances like cordyceps, which is a phenomenal Chinese medicine herb. It's actually gets lumped in the mycelium category, but it's actually a fungus that grows on these caterpillars. And usually it's found in Tibet and the high Himalayas. But cordyceps is one of the best herbs you can use to turn on AMPK and to bring down mTOR. So one of the best things you can do when it comes to, cycling growth hormone, you want to use something like cordyceps or even Mots-C. Mots-C activates AMPK. So you can get the myostatin inhibition and you can get the AMPK pathway, so you can balance the mTOR just by using Mots-C, that peptide we just talked about. So growth hormone peptides, the thing that they do is they activate your pituitary gland so that your body starts making a little more growth hormone. Some of the most popular growth hormone peptides, like CJC1295, what we discovered is if you couple it with ipamorelin, so you use 2 growth hormone releasing peptides, then you're working on both sides of the pituitary gland and you get about a 7 times greater pulse of growth hormone. And you'll notice you sleep deeper, you recover better, and you'll be able to put on enormous amounts of muscle. Testosterone is another great peptide that we've seen for muscle building. So those are 2 of the main pathways, the mTOR, the AMPK. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the recovery pathways like nitric oxide. So if you think of nitric oxide, it's a signaling gas in your body. And what nitric oxide does is it allows your blood vessels to dilate, so you get better blood circulation. The other thing nitric oxide does is it allows you to have greater levels of oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is really powerful because it's that molecule that allows us to connect. So if you think of if you've ever had a baby, and when she goes into contractions, there's an enormous amount of oxytocin that her body's releasing. And that's where when labor induction happens at hospitals, which they use this drug way too frequently, in my opinion, but they use Pitocin, which is stimulating more oxytocin in the body. But oxytocin, you can use it as a nasal spray, you can use it as an eye drop. We have some agents that you can use orally, and you can activate your body's own nitric oxide through the pathway of oxytocin. And by having adequate levels of nitric oxide, your muscles will be able to hold more nitrogen, which also allows you to bring in more nutrients, and it triggers ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which is one of the molecules that we use to measure the energy output. And so you'll see ATP increase, which typically translates into you could lift heavier things, your muscles adapt to the stress that you're putting on them. So these are fascinating. The 4th pathway that you really want to activate is testosterone. Now, testosterone is a hormone that your body makes in response to all of the environmental factors. So a lot of men have very low testosterone levels relative to optimal. Your doctor may tell you, your testosterone looks great, you're fine. Even though you're depressed, you don't get any enjoyment out of your work anymore, you've lost your sense of direction. I've seen so many of our men who, especially the entrepreneurs, they accomplish something really big in their life, and they're just stuck in the trap of wanting more and more, and they never feel that reward, and they get burned out. Our doctors get them on testosterone therapy. All of a sudden, they wake up again. They feel like themselves. They start building muscle, because testosterone is a very anabolic hormone, which means it allows you to build muscle. Remember, there's catabolic and anabolic. These are all the pathways that we're uncovering when it comes to the best supplements for muscle growth. Testosterone naturally occurs in the body. And when you're using exogenous testosterone, you do run some risks of not making it yourself. So instead of using testosterone from an external source, you can consider using like gonadorelin. Gonadorelin works on the gonadotropin-releasing hormone pathway, which activates spermatogenesis and activates testosterone production, primarily in the testes in men, ovaries in women. But the other thing that gonadorelin does is it helps circumvent the molecule that downregulates testosterone, which is cortisol. So when you have high levels of cortisol chronically at the wrong time of day, and I love cortisol, but the problem is it does turn off testosterone. And it's the gonadotropin releasing pathway, or gonadotropin releasing peptide, that can reactivate the testosterone production and downregulate cortisol. And so as we're doing this, the other thing we want to be careful of is making sure your thyroid is optimized, because if your body's in a caloric deficit, for example, maybe you're trying to lose weight, you just want to get, like some lean tissue, or you're on a GLP-1 so you don't have your hunger as much, well, your thyroid will start to respond to the lack of calories, and it will start to turn the dial down. So your thyroid can become hypothyroid, which means it's not functioning as well. But if you can think about this delicate balance, getting the right proteins for your thyroid, just enough so that your thyroid stays nice and active, you keep your testosterone naturally optimized through gonadorelin is what the peptide's called. You can also use things like Fedosia agresta, also works on some of those same supplement. But the supplements are really challenging because you don't know the exact dose. The sourcing is always suspect. With the peptides, we get them from compounding pharmacies, and they can change the expression very quickly. So just to summarize the 4 pathways, you want to think myostatin, follistatin. So inhibit myostatin, increase your follistatin. You want to think of the pathways for growth hormones, so the mTOR, AMPK. It's a really cool pathway. You want to think insulin, growth hormone, too much insulin, lower growth hormone, you're going to age faster. Your metabolic disease is going to overtake your body. You're going to end up super inflamed and overweight. And then you want to think of nitric oxide. So oxytocin, nitric oxide go hand in hand for better vasodilation. And the thing that turns that off is if you have too much epinephrine or norepinephrine, too many stimulants, can circumvent that issue. And then the 4th one is just think of testosterone. So stress, cortisol, make sure that's balanced. Testosterone will express itself better. You can use gonadorelin to help stimulate that pathway that gets turned off with chronic stress. So if you love this video and you're like, man, I want to learn more natural ways to increase my ability to grow muscle, then go to my video on creatine, and I think you'll love it. I'll see you there.